Hey guys, tonight we're traveling far back to a land of scorching sands, perfumed courtyards, and jobs so oddly specific you'll wonder how anyone ever finished a to-do list. You're waking up in ancient Thebes around 1350 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Amenhotep III. The Nile's cool mist lingers in the air as golden light spills over painted mud brick walls. Somewhere in the distance, a temple gong hums its way into morning, and the first market carts creak over the packed dirt roads. You stretch out on your woven mat, already regretting how early the sun is. There's no snooze button here, you boss. Whether a priest overseer or particularly fussy goose expects punctuality. You slip your feet into sandals made of palm fiber if you're low-ranking, or luxurious leather if you're part of the mid-tier scribal class, and duck outside. The dust is already trying to glue itself to your sweat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not a pharaoh. Let's just get that straight. But you're not a slave either. That's a modern oversimplification. You're somewhere in between. Let's say you're a craftsman employed by the state, maybe tied to temple construction, or perhaps you're in charge of hauling alabaster for tomb reliefs. Or you're lucky enough to be a professional scribe. Either way, you have a routine, and it starts early. Morning meals are light, maybe a chunk of barley bread, some dried dates, and if you're lucky, a smear of fig jam. You munch as you walk through narrow lanes buzzing with human and animal life. The air smells like a confusing mix of incense, donkey sweat, and something unidentifiably fishy from the riverbank stalls. As you make your way toward your work site, you pass neighbors who all seem to have jobs that sound more like oddly specific character traits than actual careers. There's the guardian of the temple door's second shift, pacing importantly by the gate. There's the overseer of granary recordings, not the granary itself, mind you, just its written reports. And don't forget the sandal lacer of the royal left foot. Yes, that's a real title. 1 foot, just the left. Your coworker greets you with a grunt and offers a swig of beer. Not the kind you're thinking of. Egyptian beer is more like a porridge, thick, sour, and sludgy, but it keeps you going. You down it in 2 gulps and instantly regret both. At your job site, let's say the outer walls of a temple compound, you begin sorting slabs of limestone. You're supervised by someone with far too many titles, possibly something like Inspector of Quarry Coordination and Chisel Allocation. You don't ask how he got that job. You just know he's watching and somehow still chewing something crunchy. As the sun rises, so do the stakes. You and your team are expected to maintain a rhythm. Work songs help. They're repetitive, slightly off-key chants that involve a lot of clapping and possibly some off-color jokes about the pharaoh's ears. As long as you're productive, no one minds. The structure of labor is intensely hierarchical. Your tools are regulated. Your food is rationed. But the most fascinating part, you're technically on government payroll. Egypt, especially in the New Kingdom, was essentially a giant temple state, where the pharaoh's divine authority reached into every mud brick alley and linen closet. Still, historians still argue whether these middle-tier workers were truly free laborers, or if their positions were inherited obligations tied to social caste and regional loyalty. There's no tidy answer. Like most ancient systems, Egypt's workforce doesn't map neatly onto modern ideas of employment. You're somewhere between civil servant and indentured artisan. And yet somehow it works. The temples rise, the tombs gleam, the people shuffle along. You break for a midday nap. It's not optional. The heat is unbearable, and the Nile breeze has taken the day off. You find a patch of shade and curl up on your rolled cloak. For a moment, you're not a laborer or a citizen. You're just a very sweaty person trying not to inhale a beetle. When you wake, your afternoon task involves helping a team restore paint on a statue's eyebrow. Not the statue, not the face, just the left eyebrow. See specificity. As you dip the reed brush into ochre pigment, someone nearby is discussing the price of onions. Apparently, inflation is hitting the garlic market hard. You nod, feigning sympathy. You haven't been able to afford real garlic in weeks. At sunset, the streets fill with music and laughter. Someone's roasting fish on a spit. Someone else is selling reed amulets shaped like hippos. You return home, tired, dust-covered, and full of questions. Like, why does the guy across the street only work with funerary sandals? Why are there 7 different titles for people who carry incense? And did the scribe who inscribed today's tomb graffiti really mean to call his supervisor a stale date pit? You drift off on your mat staring at the ceiling, knowing tomorrow you'll do it all again. But for tonight, you sleep. Because unlike pharaohs whose dreams are filled with divine omens, yours are mostly about cool, water-ripe figs and a day off that never comes. You wake again with the same sunrise and the same dull ache in your shoulders. But today, you're assigned to a different part of Town Leatherwork District. Yes, Thebes has its own neighborhood for shoes, belts, and those oddly intricate bra straps made of gazelle hide. And tucked between the dye pits and sandal racks is a little shop with a very specific sign: Sandal Maker to the Sandal Makers. Yes, that's real. Your task is to assist this elite craftsman, let's call him Horemheb, with preparing custom toe straps for high-ranking sandal fitters. Why would someone who makes sandals need their own sandal maker? The answer is quite simply status. Everyone in Egypt wants to be slightly more specialized than their neighbor, and nothing says prestige like having a personal supplier for your work shoes. Horemheb greets you with a nod and an armful of stiff rawhide. The tannery stinks. You smile anyway. Behind him, strips of sun-dried leather hang like laundry, each destined for someone with a title longer than the Nile. Today's client is the assistant lace crosser to the overseer of royal footwear. Not the overseer himself? No. This is his assistant's assistant. The instructions are written in delicate hieratic script. Straps must be dyed with lotus pigment wrapped in duck linen and avoid any hint of ibex odor. You don't ask. You start cutting. Horemheb hums tunelessly. The tools are bone-handled, worn smooth by generations of fussy sandal artisans. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays with what you assume is judgment. Mainstream records confirm that Egyptian leatherworkers were respected, even taxed, differently depending on whether they worked for the temples, the palace, or private merchants. But fringe records scrawled graffiti and unfinished tomb sketches suggest a certain rivalry among trades. One image from a workers' village in Deir el-Medina shows a sandal maker squabbling with a papyrus weaver over booth space, each accusing the other of smelling like wet cat. As you shape the leather, Horemheb shares gossip. Apparently, the chief sandal adjuster was demoted last week. Something about lacing a left foot first instead of the right. Big scandal. He shrugs and tells you the golden rule of Theban trades. If your client's heel blisters your career blisters, you laugh. then realize he's not joking. By midday, you're sent on an errand, deliver the finished straps to the supervisor of upper end heel fitments. You knock on his door only to be greeted by a servant whose job appears to be holding a cushion upon which the straps are to be presented. You place the leather on the pillow. The servant nods solemnly, then closes the door without a word. Egyptians took craftsmanship seriously. Every object had meaning, even sandals, especially sandals. After all, pharaohs crushed their enemies underfoot, symbolically, yes, but also quite literally. Some royal sandals were decorated with images of bound captives, so every step was an act of domination. And those sandals didn't decorate themselves. Historians still argue whether this job obsession reflected religious piety or good old bureaucratic overreach. Probably both. In Egyptian culture, order ma'at was divine, and order meant clearly defined roles, even if those roles included keeper of spare shoelaced knots. You return to Horemheb's shop just as he's wrapping up another order. This one is for a priest who wants sandals that don't squeak during offerings. You don't ask how that became a problem. Horemheb just sighs and mutters, "It's always the soundless ones who pay the most." Back on the street, you pass a boy selling scorpion-proof anklets. Probably a scam, but clever. Further down, you spot someone embroidering linen wraps with tiny hieroglyphs, left heel only. Do not use in floods. Instructions are everything. You pause by a statue of the god Ptah, the divine patron of craftsmen. His face is serene. His sandals, of course, are perfectly carved. You wonder if they had their own god-assigned sandal maker, too. As dusk falls, you help Horemheb sweep the workshop. He gives you a roll of spiced bread as thanks, probably too stale to chew, but hey, it's the gesture. You head home, your hands stiff, your nose full of tannery fumes, your mind spinning with job titles. No one would believe. You lie on your mat and drift off wondering what happens if a royal heel inspector calls in sick. Does the assistant to the deputy of ankle alignment step in? And what if someone laces sandals clockwise instead of counterclockwise? Is that how plagues start tomorrow? You're scheduled to visit the perfume district, but for now, you sleep. Hopefully, dreamless. You're up before sunrise again, this time with a purpose. Today, your errands take you to the perfumer's quarter in Memphis. The air smells noticeably sweeter here, even before the first stalls open. Resin incense curls up from temple windows, beeswax glistens on shaded trays, and someone has spilled what might be frankincense into the cobbled street. You pause. It's not unpleasant. You've been sent to assist the official sniffer of scents, a priestly functionary whose entire job revolves around one very important hole in his face, his nose. Egyptians believed the gods appreciated scent more than sight or sound. Perfumes weren't luxury, they were sacred protocol. And someone had to approve every jar. The sniffer, let's call him Painfer, gives you a serious look as you arrive. Your nose, he says solemnly, must remain impartial. You nod, trying not to inhale too deeply. Painfer leads you into his workroom where rows of alabaster jars sit waiting for assessment. He dips a reed into one and hands it to you. You sniff. It's musky, a little earthy, with a hint of something sour. That's Kai-Fi, he explains, but this batch has gone off. Smells like a hippo's laundry. You nod in agreement, though you've never smelled either. Painfer's job exists at the crossroads of faith chemistry and delicate politics. Pharaohs ordered scent recipes inscribed on temple walls, some of which survive today. Ingredients included myrrh, cinnamon, juniper berries, wine raisins, and even honey. Others included more questionable elements like galena and bitumen. And in one rare case, crocodile dung, though, that might have been more of a beauty trick than perfume. Still, bold choice. Your task today is to help Panifer test a new blend. He hands you a tiny wax cone. Egyptians wore these scented cones on their wigs during feasts, slow melting perfumes that made sure no one at dinner smelled like construction work. You balance one awkwardly on your head as Panifer lights a charcoal dish nearby. The smell begins to drift floral, slightly smoky, not unlike a garden after rain. You relax until your cone starts sliding. It lands with a soft plop on the floor. Panifer sighs. Beginner's scalp. Mainstream historical records detail how scent was crucial to rituals both divine and domestic. But some fringe texts, like those found in tucked-away workers' tombs, suggest scent approval involved real competition. One faded scroll describes a scent trial where two priests debated the superiority of lotus versus almond oil. It reportedly ended with one of them sneezing for 3 days straight. As Panifer prepares a sample for temple delivery, you're tasked with organizing the scent jars. The labels are written in shorthand lotus, blue lotus, not that lotus, and don't use near open flame. You ask no questions. Outside the perfumer's alley is coming alive. Women with copper trays carry dried herbs while boys stir pots of melted beeswax over portable fires. One man is hammering petals into cloth, releasing an overwhelming waft of rose. Another is arguing with a cat over access to a jar of animal fat used as a base for balms. The cat is winning. Historians still argue whether these perfumers were primarily religious servants or early entrepreneurs. Evidence supports both. Some were temple-bound, others ran private businesses, and a few managed to do both, which you suspect involved heavy bribes and excellent nose hygiene. You assist Panifer in packing the jars for transport. He uses straw linen scraps and what looks suspiciously like leftover wig padding. "Never waste a good curl," he mutters. As a thank you, he gifts you a tiny vial of oil. Not for temple use, he warns, but your sandals will smell like lilies for days. By mid-afternoon, the sun makes everything sticky. You wipe sweat from your brow and catch a whiff of your own increasingly fragrant armpits. You've never felt so simultaneously sacred and sweaty. You pass through a side alley where two apprentices are having a scent-off. One has crafted a pine-based balm. The other insists nothing beats coriander and donkey butter. You move on before they ask for your opinion. Back home, you unstopper your gifted vial and dab a little on your wrists. It's subtle, calming notes of resin, maybe spikenard. Not bad for a day's work. You lie back on your mat, eyes closed, surrounded by the soft, lingering aroma of old oils and new curiosities. It's not a bad way to end a day. And in your dreams, you're sniffing lotus fields beside Panifer, arguing gently over which scent goes best with fish stew. Today, you're headed to a place where elegance meets obsession, the linen workshops. Egyptians didn't just wear linen, they worshipped it. It was spun for the living, the dead, and just about every god in between. Your job is to assist in folding temple linens with a woman named Dedi, who speaks to 6 dialects of Tuk, and once ironed a priest's robe with a heated river stone. You arrive early, and the workroom is already buzzing. Young apprentices are rinsing bolts of cloth in perfumed water, while older women smooth wrinkles with ceramic rollers. Everything smells faintly of lavender and starch. It's like stepping into a spa owned by a perfectionist crocodile. Daddy greets you without looking up. She's pinning pleats into a robe so precisely that it could probably serve as a sundial. "You're here to learn," she mutters, handing you a damp length of linen. "Try not to wrinkle the gods. You get the message. As you fold, you learn that linen isn't just cloth. It's theology. The gods themselves were wrapped in it. Priests wore it exclusively, and mummies required layers upon layers each fold, symbolizing purity, order, and protection. In fact, some high-status mummies were wrapped in over 200 yards of the stuff. That's nearly 2 football fields of bedtime layering. Mainstream records describe linen as one of Egypt's most valuable exports, often traded with Syria and Nubia. But fringe notes, especially from letters found at Amarna, mention very odd fabric requests, ultra-sheer burial veils for pet monkeys, bandages embroidered with spells, even decorative loincloths for ceremonial cows. Your task shifts mid-morning. Now you're starching cloth with a mixture of flour and water, kneading it like bread before smoothing it flat. Daddy supervises from a shaded bench, fanning herself with a discarded tunic. "You want it stiff," she says, "but not angry." You nod solemnly. The linen must never be angry. Nearby, 2 men debate the proper number of pleats for an offering robe. One insists on 7, the other argues for 9, citing some obscure lunar calendar. They compromise at 8 and accuse each other of sacrilege. It's all very civil. You pause for a moment, noticing that most of the cloth is dazzlingly white. Bleaching involves sunlight natron and what Daddy calls prayers with elbow grease. In fact, elite families often hired professional whiteners. Yes, that was a job linen brightener to the house of the high priestess. Historians still argue whether Egyptian linen making was mostly ritual or mostly fashion. Truth is, it was both. It kept people cool, respectable, and in good standing with gods who apparently had very strong textile opinions. Around midday, Daddy lets you assist in folding a ceremonial loincloth. It's delicate, nearly transparent, and embroidered with tiny falcons. You accidentally fold it inside out. Daddy gasps softly, then unfolds and refolds it in 6 smooth movements. You suspect she does this in her sleep. Outside the workshop, a boy runs by with a message scroll tied to his head wrap. He stumbles, rolls, and the scroll unfurls into a clean bolt of linen someone must have dropped. He bows awkwardly and runs off. No one blinks. Later, a woman arrives with a strange request. She wants a linen shroud for her cat. But not just any shroud. She wants it pleated to mimic a falcon's wings. Daddy sighs. Another one. She pulls out a stencil-marked feline avian hybrid and hands you a thread spool. You get to work. By the end of the day, your hands smell like starch, your back aches, and your respect for linen borders on religious. You've smoothed, folded, wrapped, and tucked more fabric than a bridal boutique during flood season. Daddy hands you a scrap of embroidered cloth as a souvenir. It's pale blue and bears a tiny image of a scribe asleep under a palm tree. "For your dreams," she says. You thank her, unsure whether to frame it or wear it. As you walk home, the evening breeze flutters the linen tucked under your belt. You look up at the stars and imagine the gods wrapping the night sky in perfectly creased pleats. You curl up on your mat, swaddled in a linen blanket that now seems vaguely underdressed. You sleep dreaming of starch and sacred folds, and perhaps of a very picky cat god with a love for falcon cosplay. This morning, you've been summoned to the scriptorium, the buzzing, ink-stained heart of bureaucracy. It's where dreams of control go to die slowly in duplicate. Today, you're shadowing the scribes, Egypt's elite paper pushers, pen wielders of the Divine Ledger, and possibly the original office gossip columnists. You pass through a shaded colonnade and enter a long, stuffy chamber filled with low benches, reed pens, pots of black and red ink, and stacks of papyrus scrolls. The scribes are already hard at work, muttering to themselves while scratching hieroglyphs that resemble tiny birds in existential crisis. Your mentor today is Mena, a mid-level administrative scribe with a sharp eye, a sharp quill, and even sharper opinions about his co-workers' handwriting. He looks up from his work and gestures for you to sit. "You're just in time," he says. Someone has miscounted the temple's date rations. Again. You perch beside him and peer at the scroll in question. Sure enough, the temple accountant has recorded that 24 baskets of dates were delivered yesterday. Mena shakes his head. "It was 22, he mutters. "I counted them myself, twice, in the sun, with flies. Being a scribe is no small feat. It's a prestigious path usually reserved for the sons of literate families, or those who showed early talent for remembering tedious things. You've heard whispers that some scribes are recruited from a childhood trained not just in writing, but also in record-keeping, dream interpretation, and, of course, passive-aggressive note-taking. Mena teaches you the basics. Red ink is used for titles, warnings, and divine names. Black is for everything else. Every scroll must be rolled left to right. Every entry must be dated precisely. And under no circumstances should you spill ink on the census records of sacred geese. Someone did once. There was honking and tears. Mainstream texts show scribes in exalted positions. They worked for temples, nobles, the military, even tax collectors. But lesser-known records like those found in the workers' village at Deir el-Medina paint a more relatable picture. Scribal notes there include such gems as Pa Kep is lazy and did not show up for work, and Supervisor Wenanu is a donkey. That last one appears 4 times in a single margin. You're tasked with copying a grain report. Mena leans over your shoulder. "Your lines are crooked," he says. "Are you riding on a boat?" You straighten up, flush, and try again. Your reed pen splits halfway through, spraying a dot of ink on the parchment. Mena stares. Well, he sighs. At least now it has character. By mid-morning, the scriptorium fills with chatter. One scribe claims he's been promoted to recorder of ritual provisions for the Northern Canal temples. Another insists that's just a fancy title for bean counter with boat access. An older scribe, clearly above it all, recites a proverb. "The pen is mightier than the sickle, but not when wheat is due." You help organize finished scrolls, bundling them with linen strips and sealing them with a dab of wax. The room smells of ink, parchment, and warm sweat. Somewhere near the back, someone is composing an epic poem about fish stew. You're not sure if it's satire or state-funded literature. Historians still argue whether scribes were mostly administrators or low-key authors. Some inscriptions suggest they merely logged inventories. Others credit them with everything from hymn writing to spellcraft. Mena tells you the truth lies in between. We write what we must, he says, and sometimes what we shouldn't. He shows you a fragment of a private letter. It's addressed to someone named Neferu and reads, "If you must take the dog, take the ugly one. The beautiful one is mine." You laugh and Mena grins. The archives never lie. Lunch break comes, and the scribes pull out fig rolls and cold beer. You sit in the courtyard watching ink-stained fingers unroll gossip along with scrolls. One man claims the priest of Sobek was seen dancing during an eclipse. Another insists he heard a love poem written entirely in fish names. No one questions it. After lunch, you help Mena file complaints submitted by temple workers. One says his neighbor's goat is too musical at dawn. Another wants fewer onions in the communal stew. You ask how many of these are taken seriously. Mena shrugs. That depends. Is the goat sacred? As the day winds down, you write a short note of your own on scrap papyrus. Just to practice, really. Today, I spilled ink and was not smitten by Thoth. A good day. Mena reads it, chuckles, and pockets it for the archive. You walk home with smudged fingers and a new appreciation for bureaucracy, especially when it's filled with scribes who call their boss a donkey in permanent ink. You curl up under your linen wrap, already composing stories in your mind. Maybe tomorrow you'll write your own scroll, one with fewer grains and more dreams. The sun has barely begun its crawl across the horizon when you're shaken awake by a messenger boy breathlessly announcing your new post. You're headed to an estate out near the fields where your help is needed with goose inventory. Yes, geese. You roll out of bed wondering if this is a promotion or some kind of punishment. The estate belongs to a mid-level noble whose full title is longer than his property lines. He controls a large tract of farmland, several granaries, and most importantly today, a bustling bird yard where dozens of honking, flapping, unreasonably important geese await their annual head count. You're met at the gate by Keku, the feather ledger overseer. He's wearing a stiff tunic and a frown. Geese are unpredictable, he warns. Also, some of them hold grudges. He's not wrong. You enter a shaded courtyard filled with waddling birds of all sizes and dispositions. Their feathers shimmer in the morning light like polished bronze. Of few eye you suspiciously, perhaps remembering someone who once forgot their lunchtime millet. Today's task is simple in theory count. Every goose note its condition and confirm it has not been replaced by a duck in disguise. Yes, that's an actual concern. Ducks are sneakier and cheaper, and some estate workers have been caught trying to pad their numbers. You chuckle at the idea of a duck donning a fake goose beak. Keku does not laugh. You're handed a reed tablet, a stylus, and an assistant named Panesi, whose job is to read goose behavior. You assume that's a joke. It isn't. Panesi leads you through the pens, muttering things like, "That one's molting out of spite," and "never make eye contact with the speckled one." You try your best to look neutral. The geese remain unconvinced. Mainstream records show that large estates kept meticulous inventories of livestock, especially birds. Geese were prized not only for meat and eggs, but for their connection to certain gods. Geb, for instance, was often depicted as a goose, so technically you're working with sacred poultry. Fringe records, however, tell a different story. One infamous scroll now kept in the Cairo Museum features a cartoonishly angry goose biting a scribe on the buttocks with the caption, "Write faster, fool." It's believed to have been drawn by a bored temple guard. By midday, you're sweating profusely and slightly limping after a goose named Nefertiti nipped your ankle for what you can only assume was insolence. Panesi offers you a poultice made of mashed dates and mint. It smells nice, but you suspect it's mostly symbolic. After a brief rest under a fig tree, you assist with feather collection. Each feather must be sorted, bundled, and tagged with the donor's name. Yes, some of these geese are named. There's Papyrus honxus, and one particularly aloof specimen named High Priestess of All That Flaps. You don't argue. Panesi tells you that some temples use goose feathers to dust sacred altars. Others use them as writing quills, but only if the goose in question had a dignified temperament. You glance at your ankle and decide Nefertiti's pen career is over before it began. Historians still debate whether these elaborate bird rolls were literal or symbolic. Did geese truly receive offerings, or was it poetic exaggeration? Some tomb paintings show birds reclining on cushions surrounded by fruit. Others depict them roasting on spits. The duality is unsettling. In the afternoon heat, you help transport a cage of particularly vocal geese to a ceremonial pond. They swim better when they're being watched, Panesi explains. You're not sure if that's a goose trait or a human one. As you balance the last of the cages on a reed barge, you spot a boy sketching the geese in comically regal poses. For the estate ledger, he says, you ask why one goose is wearing a crown. He shrugs. She paid extra. Evening arrives. You're covered in down goose spit and vague resentment. Keku nods approvingly and hands you a loaf of honey bread. For not quitting, he says. High praise. As you walk home, the sound of honking lingers in your ears like a confused trumpet solo. You catch a whiff of goose feather on your tunic and sigh. You never thought you'd spend a day ranking bird charisma, but here we are. You lay down on your mat and close your eyes. In your dreams, a goose wearing gold sandals asks you to explain grain tax procedures in perfect hieroglyphs. You panic. She honks. You wake up briefly, then fall back asleep, muttering, "Never trust a duck in disguise." You're still rubbing your ankle from yesterday's goose encounter when a temple page finds you and bows. "You've been requested," he says, with a suspiciously straight face. Palace grooming detail, toenails. Ah. Moments later, you're standing in the outer courtyard of a palace complex where heat bakes the pale stone and the scent of imported myrrh drifts lazily in the air. You're greeted by a man in an exquisitely pleated tunic who introduces himself as Beck the deputy to the groomer of the royal extremities. You're not sure what to say, so you just nod politely and try not to look at anyone's feet. Beck is your new boss for the day, and he has opinions. The secret, he says, is in the file angle, never too shallow, never too proud. The gods notice. He leads you through an inner passage and gestures toward a domed chamber decorated with lotus patterns and cushions embroidered with gold thread. 2 guards stand at the door, stone-faced, holding fans. Inside, reclining on an alabaster couch, is a very relaxed courtier. Definitely not the pharaoh, but still important enough to require a multi-step foot care protocol. You bow awkwardly. The courtier wiggles his toes. Today's procedure includes warm, scented foot bath pumice rub, cuticle oil made from pressed almonds and goat milk, followed by the delicate clipping of each toenail, using a pair of bronze shears, etched with tiny falcons. You are handed a towel. You may dry, Beck instructs, solemnly. You do so with the intensity of a man buffing a sun disk. Mainstream records note how personal grooming in the royal court was serious business. Servants attended to cosmetics, wigs, jewelry, and, yes, nails. But fringed tomb art includes more curious hints. One wall painting shows a servant presenting a toenail clipping on a lotus dish, while another depicts a pharaoh inspecting his cuticles beside a statue of Hathor. No captions explain why. Beck motions you over to assist with trimming. You hesitate. He gives you a look. You step forward, accept the shears, and clip your very first royal adjacent nail. It lands neatly in a bronze dish shaped like a papyrus leaf. You exhale. A priest murmurs something about divine symmetry. Someone begins humming. Later, you help an attendant apply protective balm to the soles of the courtiers' feet. Apparently, palace floors are too smooth for bare skin. The balm smells faintly of honey and lemon. You wonder if it's edible. You decide not to test this in front of armed guards. Historians still argue whether this level of care was truly given to every elite or whether these depictions were idealized propaganda. After all, one surviving papyrus lists an official with the title Wiper of the royal back of the neck, which may be metaphor, satire, or disturbingly literal. After the grooming, you're sent to polish a small display case holding royal foot jewelry. Yes, that's a thing. Anklets of turquoise gold toe rings and even decorative heel caps inlaid with lapis. You nearly drop one when a scribe walks in yelling that someone has mislabeled a sandal as left when it is clearly ambidextrous. The horror! Beck sighs and fixes the label himself. This is why we keep the toenail records, he mutters. You pause. We keep what? Turns out some households actually filed nail clippings, sometimes buried with the person, sometimes burned in rituals. The idea was that every part of the body should be accounted for in the afterlife, even the bits that grow back. You nod slowly, your brain trying not to imagine a sarcophagus filled with tiny golden jars marked left pinky toe. The day ends with one final grooming session for a lady of the court. She has 4 servants. One braids her wig, another oils her elbows. A third applies rose petal powder to her knees, and the fourth, that's you, is instructed to arrange her foot cushion just so. You do. She smiles vaguely. As you leave the palace, Beck presses a sliver of sandalwood soap into your hand. To remove foot oils, he says cryptically, then adds, "You did better than the last one." He fainted during exfoliation. You walk home with tender respect for those who tend to royal toes. You've also developed an unsettling instinct to scan people's heels for uneven wear. That night, your dreams are strangely tidy rows of perfect feet, lined up in alabaster tubs, chanting softly as you clip, file, and oil your way to enlightenment. Today's job takes you somewhere quieter, but no less peculiar. The temple library vaults. Your task: assist the keepers in organizing ancient scrolls, cataloging dream interpretations, and oddly enough, sniffing for mold. You arrive at dawn, where the air is already thick with incense and something else, papyrus dust perhaps, or the collective exhaustion of generations of sleepy librarians. You're greeted by Tia, the archivist of hidden things, who wears 7 amulets and a look of mild alarm, as if the scrolls might explode at any moment. Quiet hands, she whispers, and quiet thoughts. The scrolls can tell. You nod solemnly. The temple library is no ordinary archive. It's a maze of narrow shelves, clay jars, wooden cubbies, and intricately labeled scroll baskets. Some scrolls are sealed with wax. Others are bound in colored ribbons, red for medicine, blue for prayers, green for dream texts. One scroll is tied with a knotted goat hair and labeled simply, "Noisy." You put that one back. Your job begins with sorting. Tia hands you a pile labeled omens and digestive complaints. You're not sure whether that's one category or 2. Mainstream Egyptologists know libraries were typically attached to temples run by priests and scribes who guarded knowledge like treasure. Many scrolls dealt with rituals, astronomy, medicine, and spells. But fringe records particularly from outposts like Edfu and Abydos, reveal weirder entries, dream journals involving talking cats, instructions for predicting floods using goose behavior, and one scroll dedicated to soothing awkward guests. Tia sets you up with a fresh brush and a pot of cedar oil. Dust them gently, she says. Some of these scrolls haven't been opened since the last eclipse. You lean over a fragile document whose title reads, "What to Do If the Moon Refuses to Rise." Inside it suggests singing to the moon in falsetto while waving a bowl of milk. Just in case, Tia shrugs. Next, you're asked to help with a scroll inventory. The list includes practical works, proper storage of leaks, curses for squeaky doors, as well as more curious titles like List of Gods, Most Likely to Ignore You, and Feasts that resulted in regret. One scroll catches your eye, The Dreams of the Goat Herder. Year 8 of the Golden Heron. It features 12 nightmares involving flooded stables and judgmental relatives. Each entry ends with a possible cure like wear a beetle amulet upside down or don't eat lentils before sundown. You copy it carefully for Tia, who adds, "That one's been requested twice this week. Lunch is taken in silence as per temple custom." You chew slowly on lentil bread, suddenly suspicious. In the afternoon, you join Tia and 2 other keepers for scroll repair. Using fine linen thread and wheat paste, you mend a broken roll titled Proper Phrasing when addressing a sleepy god. The instructions are oddly specific. Use low tones, never mention onions, and always compliment the sandals. A sleepy god is still a powerful god, Tia warns. At one point, an acolyte rushes in with a new scroll discovery, a sealed message found in the wall behind a crumbling statue. It's labeled, "Emergency notes do not open unless the sky turns green." You raise your hand. Has the sky ever turned green? Tia blinks. Not recently. Still, we catalog it. Historians still argue whether libraries were open to the public or strictly priestly domains. Evidence suggests layers of access, some texts for daily rituals, others restricted to high initiates. Tia refers to one section of the vault as the Whispering Shelf. When you ask why, she just smiles and changes the subject. You help stack the day's cleaned scrolls into their storage baskets, tucking them in like sleeping children. Each is labeled with care, from the grand map of the 7 celestial boats to the humble recipe for stomach peace. Before you leave, Tia gives you a folded note written on scrap papyrus. It reads, "When your dreams make no sense, write them anyway. That's when the gods are listening." You step back into the fading light of late afternoon, blinking as the sun returns your sense of time. The world outside feels louder, simpler, less prone to mysterious whispers from rolled-up parchment. That night, you lie on your mat and whisper your day's dreams to the ceiling. You imagine the gods listening with amused smiles and immaculate toenails passing your scroll around and chuckling softly. This morning, you're headed down to the riverfront. Not for fishing or swimming or any kind of leisurely boat ride. No, you're here to help with the noble and underappreciated task of washing statues. Yes, stone ones, divine ones. Several tons of carved sanctity that must sparkle apparently on a schedule known only to high priests and the god of very particular standards. The temple complex looms large behind you as you approach the purification platform by the Nile. The early light makes the river look almost silver, and several crocodiles bask on a distant sandbank, utterly disinterested in your divine chore list. You're greeted by a wiry man named Hawkhoof, the sprinkler of sacred stone, who's already knee-deep in river mud and wrangling a goat hairbrush that's somehow both frayed and reverent. "You're late," he says. Ra rose on time. So should you. No arguing with that logic. Your first assignment is a statue of Anubis carved from polished black basalt and staring off into eternity, like he's been waiting to be dusted for centuries, which, given the temple's maintenance schedule, may not be entirely wrong. You fetch a bucket, dip it carefully into the Nile, and begin scrubbing. Harkuf watches you like a hawk watches a baby duck. "Clockwise," he mutters, "always clockwise, unless it's a crocodile god. Then go counterclockwise, obviously. The job is more complex than it looks. Each statue has its own ritual requirements. Some get washed daily, others weekly, some only during certain lunar phases. The record keepers have charts, scrolls, and what appears to be a color-coded pebble system. You try to make sense of it. You fail. Mainstream texts confirm the ritual cleansing of statues was a major part of temple life. Gods were considered living presences within their images, and caring for the statues wasn't symbolic. It was devotional maintenance. These stone forms were fed, dressed, and yes, washed regularly, but fringe temple graffiti tells a more exasperated story. One scrawl behind a falcon-headed statue reads, "If Horus requires another footbath, I resign." Another, etched very low on a pedestal, simply says, "Still here. You help rinse a statue of Hathor next applying flower-scented oil to her smooth limestone cheeks." A priest swings a censer nearby, wafting frankincense through the air. The statue, as always, says nothing, but you're convinced she's amused. Later, you assist in drying the great seated image of Ptah. He's huge. His stone feet alone could crush a particularly optimistic librarian, and he's seated within a shrine so narrow you have to slide sideways just to polish his ankles. Harkuf tells you a story while you work. Once a novice used the wrong cloth goat hair instead of linen, and the next morning the entire temple smelled like cheese. Coincidence, he asks. The priests think not. By midday you're dripping with sweat and holy water. Your sandals squelch. You're handed a reed broom and asked to sweep the shrine of Sobek, god of crocodiles. You do so cautiously. The air in there is damp and suspicious. You're fairly certain something is still alive in the drain. Historians still debate how literally Egyptians treated these daily rites. Some argue that only the high priests believed in the physical indwelling of the gods, while others suggest the rituals were social theater, divine pageantry, reinforcing royal order. Then again, no one likes to be the one who forgets to rinse the sun god's chin. The final statue of the day is a lesser-known local deity, Meriti, guardian of sacred baskets. She's small, delicately carved, and slightly chipped at the elbow. You're told to be especially gentle. Someone once over-polished her, and the temple lost 3 baskets to termites in a single week. You finish with a ritual bow and a whisper of gratitude. Harkuf pats your shoulder. "You got potential," he says. "Just work on your elbow circles." As you leave, you spot another team preparing offerings of bread and figs for the now glowing statues. One priest carries a tray of beer with the concentration of a man transporting liquid gold. Another is trying to attach a linen sash to a particularly disinterested falcon. You head home smelling like sacred soap and wet stone. Your muscles ache, but your spirit feels oddly light, maybe because you just helped refresh the literal face of the divine. That night, you dream of statues blinking slowly, shrugging off centuries of dust and stepping gently down from their pedestals to stretch their legs. They nod at you. One even smiles. You're woken before sunrise by a rhythmic clack-clack outside your doorway. Someone's knocking with a staff and they're not being subtle. It's Nebamun, the overseer of ritual beverages, and he's already 3 cups into his duties. Come, he says briskly. We're making sacred beer today. And you'll be stirring. You shuffle out into the early light, still rubbing your eyes, only to be greeted by the unmistakable scent of yeast date syrup and something that can only be described as warm barley optimism. The brewery is located just behind the temple kitchens, shielded from the sun by woven reed mats. Large ceramic vats bubble quietly, while workers fan fires stir, mash, and sing softly to keep the rhythm. You notice the songs are more about temperature than spirituality. Not too hot, not too fast. Or the goddess will spit it back. Today's brew is for Hathor, goddess of joy music and inebriated decision-making. She is unsurprisingly the recipient of a lot of beer. Nebamun hands you a long paddle and points to a simmering vat the size of a water buffalo. Stir gently, talk sweetly. The mash listens. You begin your circular movements murmuring the kind of things you'd say to a nervous donkey, soft, encouraging nonsense with a hint of barley-based optimism. Mainstream scholars agree beer was essential to Egyptian life. It wasn't just a drink, it was food, wages, medicine, and offering all in one. Workers on temple sites were often paid in beer. Pregnant women drank it in moderation. Even toddlers got their own weak brews. It was bread you could sip. Fringe records, however, suggest temple beer recipes varied wildly. Some included juniper or pomegranate rind. One dubious scroll references festive goat milk ale, which Nebamun swears was only brewed once. We try not to speak of that day. Your arms ache as you stir, but the mash begins to thicken, releasing a warm, slightly sour scent. Over in the next stall, an apprentice is shaping dried dates into little figurines to drop into the fermentation jars, a tradition said to amuse the goddess and keep bad spirits from turning the beer sour. You're handed one shaped like a tiny hippo. You drop it in solemnly. Nebamun explains the steps as you go mash the grain ferment in amphorae with added dates or honey seal with linen. Pray for no exploding jars. The last part is key, he says, pointing to a dark stain on the ceiling. That's from last midsummer. We lost a whole batch and 2 ceiling tiles. You help strain the mixture into a large clay jar, watching the liquid shift from thick beige to cloudy golden. It's beautiful in the late morning sun, like the Nile itself, if the Nile were slightly tipsy. Historians still argue whether temple beer was actually consumed by priests or only used for offerings. In some rituals, it was poured over altars or burned in clay saucers to release a yeasty incense. But letters from the estate of a priestess in Thebes suggest beer was also a diplomatic tool, gifted in negotiations, used to settle disputes, and occasionally weaponized. One anecdote involves a disgraced scribe and a deliberately over-fermented brew known as the Breath of Set. While the current batch cools, you help tie reeds around sealed amphorae, each labeled with the brew date and the intended ritual. One is for new moon appeasement, another for boat blessing, and a third simply says, for auntie. Lunch is bread soaked in yesterday's batch, served cool with pickled radish. It's oddly refreshing, like biting into a farmer's picnic, and a faint regret. Nebamun offers you a second helping. You politely decline. The afternoon is spent arranging jars in cool alcoves beneath the brewery. You notice a few with amusing nicknames scratched into their sides. Noisy one very strong and saved by the goose. You don't ask. Before you leave, Nebamun hands you a small flask. For your journey, he says, a gentle brew. May it make your dreams friendly and your neighbors quieter. You walk home with your arms still smelling faintly of barley mash and your mind drifting into pleasant haze. The world feels slower, rounder. Even the geese seem less judgmental. That night, you sip from the flask before bed. The brew is earthy sweet and just strange enough to make you smile. You fall asleep thinking of laughing goddesses and beer that listens when stirred. In your dream, you're stirring the Nile with a wooden paddle, and the river murmurs back, steady now. You're doing fine. You're starting to suspect that temple life is just a rotating wheel of oddly specific jobs. Because today, you've been assigned to incense duty. Yes, burning things gently with flair and focus. You arrive at the designated incense station just as the first light filters through the high columns. It's like stepping into the lungs of a divine perfume bottle. Everything smells like a mixture of pine resin, cinnamon lotus petals, and ambition. Your guide today is a woman named Ipu. She's small, calm, and entirely unimpressed by your enthusiasm. This isn't just lighting things on fire, she tells you, handing over a bundle of dried herbs and a pot of glowing coals. This is divine chemistry. It's also Tuesday, so sandalwood first. The incense platform is nestled near the innermost shrine of the temple where only select personnel are allowed. You stand beside towering bronze burners, intricate offering tables, and a small bench covered with neatly labeled resin cones and pressed pellets. One smells like myrrh, another like roasted almonds. A third smells suspiciously like old onions, which Ipu assures you is intentional. Mainstream accounts confirm that incense played a huge role in Egyptian worship, used to purify spaces, honor the gods, and act as offerings in itself. Certain recipes were reserved for morning rituals. Others only burned during festivals. Myrrh and frankincense were so valuable they were imported via long-distance trade routes from Punt and beyond. But lesser-known records like the Scroll of Smoke and Scent, tucked in the back of a shrine wall, mention incense used for more unusual purposes to soothe angry hippos, ward off uninvited guests, and in one bizarre case, convince a statue to reveal its secret name. No word on whether that worked. Your first job is grinding dried frankincense into fine powder. Ipu demonstrates with a stone pestle and rhythmic meditative focus. Think of your thoughts like the resin, she says. Sticky, strong, better when crushed. You give it a try. It's oddly satisfying sanding a pebble into a cloud. Next, she walks you through the 7 breaths of the flame, a ceremonial sequence in which you waft incense smoke toward a statue in 7 distinct motions. One for the eyes, one for the ears, one for the nose, one for the mouth. The last 3 are less clear. Ipu just gestures vaguely and mutters, "Spirit stuff." You follow her lead, tracing lazy smoke spirals through the still air. It feels like dancing very slowly with invisible wings. Later, you mix your first incense paste, crushed frankincense, cinnamon bark, honey, and a splash of temple wine. It smells like a festival made of dessert. Ipu lets you shape the paste into a cone and set it on the altar burner. It sizzles, sighs, and sends up a golden plume of warmth. By midday, you're lightheaded, not from the smoke you assure yourself, but from spiritual enlightenment, or maybe both. Ipu prepares the afternoon blend, a smoky, resinous mixture reserved for calming overly active gods or priests with strong opinions about architecture, you helped carry a tray of incense around the inner shrine, trailing tendrils of smoke behind you. As you pass the statue of Osiris, a breeze from nowhere flutters your tunic. Apu nods approvingly, that's a good sign. Or a pigeon. Historians still argue over which incense recipes were standard and which were secret. Some believe high-ranking priests guarded their blends like treasure, passing them down in whispered instructions. Others suggest incense was more flexible, with recipes changing depending on season purpose or the temperament of the local goat herd. You finish the day by cleaning the burners, scraping out ash, polishing the bronze, and preparing cones for the next dawn ritual. Ipu lets you pick your final scent to burn. You choose something floral and a little peppery. She raises an eyebrow. Bold, she says. Let's hope the gods aren't allergic. You step outside into the fading light, trailing the day's final curl of incense behind you. The air feels cleaner, quieter, like something has been reset. That night, your dreams are thick with scent. You wander through a temple of endless columns, following wisps of myrrh that lead you past glowing statues, sleepy lions, and a small stone jar that whispers riddles you forget by morning. You're starting to think that temple work might secretly be designed to keep everyone just confused enough to obey. Case in point, today's assignment is to carry silence. You're not entirely sure what that means, but the priest who handed you the note looked very serious and very, very quiet. You arrive at the chapel of Ma'at, goddess of truth balance, and knowing exactly how much to say. It's a small space tucked behind the main sanctum, decorated with delicate carvings of feathered scrolls and people politely not speaking. Inside, you meet your instructor, a serene-looking elder named Huya. Your task today, he whispers, is not to chant, not to burn, not to scrub. You are here to absorb and deliver quiet. You nod silently. Huya leads you to a low stool near the central altar. You are handed a feather, not a scroll, not a tool, just a single white ostrich feather placed delicately in your palm. You'll walk the temple with this, he says, and listen to what? To what speaks when nothing else does. Well, that clears absolutely nothing up. You begin your assigned walk through the temple complex, feather in hand. The morning is unusually still. No drums, no geese, no bickering scribes, just the soft slap of sandals and the occasional chime of a far-off wind bell. The feather is a symbol of Ma'at, of course. In mainstream belief, it represents balance and truth, most famously used during the weighing of the heart ceremony, where a soul's worth is tested against the feather in the afterlife. If your heart's heavier than this wisp of fluff, well, awkward. Fringe beliefs vary. Some temple scrolls suggest the feather can soak up lies or detect insincerity when waved near the mouth. One questionable poem implies the feather will fly toward anyone harboring petty thoughts. You test this theory briefly by walking near a group of gossipy acolytes. The feather does not move. Suspicious. You make your way through the courtyard past the statue garden. It's here that you begin to notice things: a cracked offering dish that no one's replaced, a child sleeping in the shade of a broken sphinx, the soft click of beetles under a pile of lotus stems, things no one talks about but everyone walks past. Silence has a texture here. It's not just absence, it's layer. The way a breeze lifts the smell of sand, or how a shadow can feel like a sentence left unsaid. You stop by the record hall, where a junior scribe is furiously scribbling on a wax tablet. He looks up, sees a feather in your hand, and immediately lowers his quill. I didn't mean to write that part, he says. You say nothing. He quickly edits something out. You move on. By midday, you return to Huya, who now sits cross-legged in the chapel's corner. He asks, still softly, "What did you hear?" You hesitate. Then you say, "The offering plate is cracked. There's a baby sphinx nap happening in the north corridor, and someone's correcting their gossip." Huya smiles. Good. You've carried silence well. He instructs you to write down your impressions, but not in words. In shadows, he says, or footprints, or the way dust gathers on the ignored. You try sketching a spiral of sandals and silence in a patch of sand. Huya nods. We'll count that. Historians still argue what role listening rituals played in daily temple life. Some sources suggest they were meditative practices, a chance for priests to practice presence and reflection. Others think they were more performative, a reminder that God speaks through absence as much as action. As you end your walk, you pass a priest preparing the shrine of Ma'at herself. He bows to your feather and says, "You heard it today, didn't you?" You nod. Before you leave, Huya presents you with a slip of papyrus. It reads, "The loudest lie is the one no one speaks aloud." He then gently fans you once with the feather, a silent benediction. You walk home lighter, not from lack of labor, but from what you didn't say. That night, you sleep without dreams, but wake up feeling like someone somewhere whispered something important to you just before dawn. You wake to the smell of fresh paint and old gossip today. You've been summoned to assist the workshop of sacred miniatures. That's right. You're entering the delicate, quietly chaotic world of making tiny things for gods who like their offerings both symbolic and extremely well crafted. The artisan quarters are nestled behind the temple's eastern wall, shaded by linen awnings that flap lazily in the morning breeze. You find yourself stepping into a sun-dappled courtyard scattered with scraps of wood chips of faience and oddly half a clay fish with a smug expression. You make a mental note not to ask. You're met by Harissa, a master miniaturist, whose robe is covered in blotches of ochre and pride. Today, she says, handing you a palm-sized reed basket, you're making a model bread loaf. One that says, "Yes, I'm symbolic, but I'd still taste amazing." You nod. Your fingers are not feeling particularly artistic, but they'll have to do. The miniature workshop is unlike the rest of the temple. It hums with quiet energy, precise gestures, and the occasional creative meltdown. Artisans sculpt wax cows, carve minuscule tools, and paint gods into existence on tiles smaller than your thumbnail. There's an apprentice in the corner trying to glue a beard onto a figure of Osiris. Keeps falling off. He looks personally betrayed. Your first task is mixing pigment red ochre from Nubia yellow, from Sinai, and blue ground from lapis lazuli. So fine it's stored in a linen-wrapped jar labeled "Use Only" when feeling emotionally prepared. Mainstream temple practice included placing miniature offerings in tombs and sanctuaries, bread loaves, boats, musical instruments, even entire banquet scenes. These stood in for the real thing and were believed to magically transform in the afterlife. A well-made tiny duck was theoretically just as delicious as a full-sized one, provided the gods were willing to play along. Fringe texts hint at a rival temple that once sent a life-sized offering of a model cow, only to discover later that the deity in question preferred goats. The theological embarrassment was considerable. You start shaping your bread loaf using a paste of crushed limestone barley dust and a touch of gluey resin. Harissa nods approvingly. Make it plump, she says. The gods notice stinginess. Next to you, another artisan is painting an entire dinner scene onto a slab the size of a fig. There's a tiny harpist, 3 dancers mid-spin, and what appears to be a jug of wine with tiny grapes embossed on its side. For the tomb of someone important, she says. He specifically requested good music and average guests. After finishing your loaf, you help another artisan assemble a model granary complete with 4 teeny clay workers, 2 sacks of actual grain glued shut, and a roof that lifts off to reveal daily operations. You're told this is for a priestess's burial and the figures must appear busy, but not stressed. As the day goes on, the workshop quiets into focused murmurs. You notice a row of animal figurines, cats, ibises, hippos, each with perfectly carved eyes and just enough sass to imply divine awareness. Harissa points to a falcon with crossed wings. That one took 3 weeks. We redid the eyebrow 5 times. You do not mess up Horus's eyebrow. Historians still debate whether every item in a tomb was meant for actual use in the afterlife or if some were just status symbols. What's certain is the sheer variety of what was included, from doll-sized breweries to teeny furniture sets with working hinges. Your last project is carving a symbolic fish. Harissa gives you a lump of clay and a model for reference. It has an eyebrow. You ask if the fish is supposed to look judgmental. Yes, she says. It wards off bad dreams. You do your best, but your fish looks surprised. Still, it earns a place on the offering shelf labeled Fish of Possibly Mixed Intentions. As evening settles in, the workshop glows gold with the sun's last light reflecting off polished faience. Your bread loaf joins a row of others, each a small, heartfelt bribe for eternal favor. Harissa claps a dusty hand on your shoulder. You've got promise, she says. Your fish might need therapy, but your loaf has presence. You walk home with paint on your sleeves and the smell of resin in your hair, feeling like you left something sacred behind in miniature form. That night, you dream you're tiny yourself, dancing on a model stage with a harpist who won't stop tuning. The gods are watching. You offer your loaf. One of them smiles. By now, you've seen almost every corner of temple life, goose-wrangling incense choreography, and the noble art of divine pedicures. But this morning's assignment might be the most curious yet. You're heading into the dream chamber, not to sleep, unfortunately, but to help record other people's. You find the entrance tucked behind a narrow colonnade half hidden by curtains dyed deep indigo and embroidered with tiny gold stars. The air inside is hushed and heavy with blue lotus perfume. Lamps hang low from the ceiling, glowing like sleepy eyes. You're greeted by a scribe named Pa Nedjem, whose name translates roughly to Sweet One. He wears ink-stained linen, and his hair looks like it's been slept on by cats. Dreams, he says, not quite blinking, are the gods whispering in metaphor or indigestion, or both. You're handed a wax tablet and a stylus. Today, Pa Nedjem continues. You'll record what people saw in their sleep. Accuracy optional. Dignity negotiable. Your first client is a teenage novice who dreamt of a talking crocodile that offered her career advice. You write it down dutifully, even the part where the crocodile suggested switching to accounting. Mainstream records confirm that dream interpretation was a serious and somewhat bureaucratic affair in ancient Egypt. Temple complexes often kept dream books, catalogs of symbols, outcomes, and advice for deciphering visions. If you dreamt of a white bird that meant good fortune, If you dreamt of losing your wig, that could indicate betrayal or just that your wig fit badly. But fringe interpretations found in private tombs and graffiti offer more colorful insights. One dream book includes a section titled, "What It Means If You Are Chased by a Giant Duck," while another simply reads, "Dreamt of stars in my stew. Felt peaceful. No action required." Pa Nedjem explains that dreams are recorded for more than just curiosity they guide. Rituals help priests interpret divine moods and occasionally give warnings. One time, he whispers, a woman dreamt of a broken fan. That afternoon, the pharaoh's canopy collapsed in the wind. Coincidence, or poorly constructed shade, your second dreamer is an elderly basket weaver who insists she floated above the temple while the gods below played senate and argued over who gets the last fig. You nod solemnly and sketch a quick diagram of divine board game etiquette. In between dream interviews, you help file older records. Some are drawn in ink on thin papyrus scrolls, others are scrawled directly onto potsherds. You find one particularly amusing note: dreamt I was a fish, felt wet, woke up dry, all is well. Lunch is a quiet affair, pomegranate seeds and honeyed bread eaten beneath a painted ceiling, meant to look like the night sky. Pa Nedjem chews slowly and tells you that certain herbs like blue lotus and mandrake were used to encourage dreams, or at least make them more dramatic. It works, he says, but the dreams tend to involve talking furniture and endless doors. Afterward, you assist with the interpretive process. Pa Nedjem shows you the basics: red ink for negative omens, black ink for neutral gold ink, for dreams involving God's royalty or particularly elegant poultry. Never skimp on the gold, he warns, if the dream included Horus wearing earrings. Historians still argue how much influence dreams had on temple decisions. Some evidence points to dreams guiding major actions like the construction of a shrine or the appointment of a priest. Others believe they were more of a spiritual feedback system, helpful but not binding. Either way, everyone agrees if the high priest dreams about a flood, it's time to check the levees and your attitude. As the sun begins to dip, a priestess arrives with a tightly sealed dream scroll. She places it reverently on the altar lights, a cone of sandalwood incense, and says only, "It was very loud." No one asks questions. You do not open the scroll. Your final task is to help prepare the dream offering shelf, a place where people can leave tokens to appease, thank, or confuse the dream gods. Today's offerings include a feather, a painted pebble, 2 fig slices, and a tiny clay model of a man being chased by bees. You gently arrange them beside a carved lotus and a bowl of sleep balm. Pa Nedjem gives you a pat on the shoulder. "You got a good ear for nonsense," he says. That's essential. You walk home, blinking away the thick scent of lotus oil and candle smoke. The sky is deepening to violet, and you half expect a talking crocodile to stroll out from behind a palm tree and ask about your 5-year plan. That night, your dream is simple. You're flying above the city, slow and weightless, watching the Nile glitter like poured honey below. The gods are playing dice on the rooftops, and one of them waves at you not to warn or to bless, just to say, "Nice loaf yesterday." The last day of your temple rotation arrives quietly, as if it's been tiptoeing up behind you this whole time. You're summoned at dawn to assist with a ceremony called Opening the Day, a calm, ritualistic orchestration of light movement and sound designed not for spectacle, but for welcome. You will help wake the gods. You meet the ritual team at the eastern gate where the first sunbeams catch the tops of the pylon towers. Everything smells faintly of lilies, cool linen, and polished stone. A senior priest named Menwi gives you a small copper mirror and a nod. Today, he says you'll reflect the sun. You follow the others into the heart of the temple. The corridors are still dim, holding their breath before the sun breaks through. Incense has already been lit, soft plumes rising like dreams left behind on the floor. The statues have been dressed, the floors swept. Even the air feels expectant. Your first task is simple but precise. Angle your mirror toward a small polished disc embedded in the wall of the sanctuary. When the sun crests the horizon, it will reflect from your mirror to the disc, and from there to the base of the central god statue. It reminds them, Menwi says, that morning has arrived and we've not forgotten our part. Mainstream texts confirm that temples ran on solar logic. Many were designed so that sunlight would strike key parts of a sanctuary on specific days, solstices, festivals, or royal birthdays. It wasn't just architectural, it was liturgical. But some fringe accounts suggest even more precise optical play, reflecting beams across water basins, directing light down corridors, using polished metal plates, even using smoke to catch a beam and trace its movement like a ribbon. Some temples, it seems, didn't just welcome the sun, they choreographed it. You take your place in the silent darkness. The sun rises, the disc catches fire. The beam strikes the foot of the statue just as designed. Someone nearby exhales a quiet yes. The day has officially begun. From here, everything flows. You assist with the ritual water, pouring 3 pitchers of scented water offered with gentle hand flourishes and whispered invocations. One for the sky, one for the earth, one for what falls in between. Then comes music, not loud brassy temple drums, but soft rhythmic clapping, rattling sistrums, and the slow chant of a 3-note phrase, come light, come light, come light. You chant too, quietly. You're starting to understand it's less about what the gods hear and more about what you feel when you say it. There's no crowd, no fanfare, just a few participants, the gods, and the slow unfolding of sun through painted columns. You help rearrange the offerings at the altar: figs, onions, flowers, a folded linen ribbon embroidered with stars. You place your hands briefly on each item before setting it down as instructed. Let them know it passed through you, says Menwi. Later, you help an apprentice polish the statue of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of knowledge, using a soft cloth and a few drops of palm oil. He thanks you with a tilt of his head and hands you a tiny votive figurine of a scribe. A gift, he says, to remember that the smallest acts still write history. Historians still argue whether ceremonies like this were daily rituals for public benefit or internal priestly performances. Some suggest they were a kind of cosmic maintenance keeping the divine machine humming. Others see them as a form of meditative repetition, a practice to align temple life with the greater rhythms of nature. Before the ceremony ends, you're asked to carry a small tray of offerings out to the temple gardens, a symbolic gift for the gods' other forms: plants, birds, breezes, and bugs. You place a fig beneath a sycamore tree and bow slightly to a dragonfly that lands on your tray as if it's entitled to a share. On your way back, Menwi catches you and presses something into your hand. It's a scrap of linen with a single word stitched in gold to pish. Stillness, he says. It's the last thing the gods need and the first thing people forget. You walk home, not in a rush, but in rhythm. The world feels clearer. Not louder, not quieter, just more precise, like the hinge of a well-balanced door. That night, after dinner, in a long stretch of silence, you fall asleep with a scrap of linen tucked under your pillow. Your dream is simple, a vast hallway of light flanked by stone pillars and humming gently like a drum in reverse. You walk it slowly, barefoot, without fear. And this time, the gods don't wave or speak. They just nod. So now as the dream fades and the temple recedes behind the soft veil of sleep, you feel the echo of your journey settle like fine dust. You've touched offerings, scrubbed divine toes, sung to statues, stirred sacred beer, and listened to the quiet between incense plumes. The gods have watched perhaps, smiled, or perhaps they simply noted your work and returned to their celestial paperwork. Whatever their reaction, your part is done. The columns grow dimmer now, the painted walls folding away into the soft edges of your mind. The warm stone beneath your feet becomes your bed. The chants dissolve into the hush of your breath. And that fig tree in the garden, it's still there, swaying gently in the breeze you left behind. You can still feel the shape of the feather in your hand, the polished mirror in your fingers, the rhythm of walking in silence. These are the textures of a day well spent, even in a world of gods and crocodile-watching scribes. You've been everywhere and nowhere, touched eternity, and still made it home in time for dinner. Now, let it all go. Let the geese quiet down. Let the stars rise slowly over the Nile. Let your thoughts wander without urgency. The gods are tended to. The offerings have been made. The ink has dried on your scrolls. There's nothing left to carry. Just rest. Close your eyes. Breathe deep and float gently down the river of sleep. The temple will still be there tomorrow,